First of all, I think we should just say welcome. And I thought we would start by if you just tell me, what do you think people should learn from Sprint? What do you think it should provide to our master students?
At the sort of highest level, I think that whatever you do after this in your work, I hope you'll carry the idea of experimenting with the way that you do your work. That's really the thing that I think has been very powerful about the design sprint is I tried to take a part of the process of building products, the beginning part, how do you figure out what to do, and create a checklist for it, kind of create a recipe for it. Because I saw that teams were failing over and over again because they were just sort of making it, we had to make it up as we went every time. And I hope that you'll carry that idea, even if you don't like design sprints, and I hope they're useful to you too. But I hope you'll carry that idea of examining the way that you work and some of the default settings and the ways that we have meetings and talk to each other. There's so much room for improvement there, and you'll think of things that I never would.
Okay, and if someone's applying the sprint ideas rather than just the kind of process, what do you think are the key practical things they should keep in their mind to make it work as a good team?
Well, one of the things to keep in mind the whole time is that you've got your customers coming in at the end. You're going to show a prototype to some customers, and having that in mind actually helps a lot with the team dynamics, because this idea that there's a deadline coming up very quickly. We know who we're doing this for. We can imagine the customers who we're recruiting to talk to. We're building a prototype, and we're building something that we're really just building to show to them. That adds, I think, a lot of clarity. So if you can keep that in mind, and you can also simultaneously, I always ask the team to keep in mind what's going to happen in 12 to 18 months. If everything goes perfectly and with this thing and we launch, I want people to be really optimistic at the same time that they're being very practical about what they're going to show people in that week. So that's part of it, just this mindset of what we're doing in the sprint and keeping that at the top of your mind. The other part is to really try to set aside your biases about what your colleagues, your teammates can and can't do, because the sprint's designed to help you do that by giving everyone a chance to do their own thing and put it up anonymously. But I'm going to ask you to keep that in mind, keep this idea of being open to seeing what your colleagues come up with, and also to take that a step further and be open about what you can do. A lot of times, folks who aren't used to being the ones solving the problems or putting their ideas down on paper, drawing things, will feel a bit uncomfortable coming into the sprint. And I have seen time and time again, those folks can shine in a design sprint. But part of it starts with you saying, I'm going to be open to what I can do, and I may be able to do more than I think I can. And I hope that you'll find the design sprint enables you to do that.
And what should a team do if there's someone who isn't contributing, who in a sense is being quiet for various different reasons? How can they respond to that?
Yeah, this is a great question. If someone's not being involved, it's a great idea to ask them to be involved, to make sure that you're hearing from them every now and again. That said, I have tried to structure a lot of times in the sprint process where everyone sort of has to quietly write things down or be involved or vote, whatever it might be. And so I know that those folks who are feeling more quiet for whatever reason will have an opportunity to be involved. I never like to force people to talk, but I will periodically, if I'm facilitating, look around the room and say, hey, Will, we haven't heard from you for a minute. Anything that you're thinking about this that you want to share, even if it's kind of, and I might literally say this, even if you have anything kind of like negative to say, you disagree with this or anything, that would be cool too. And then I might, to take sort of the pressure off Will at this point, I might look around, or anybody else, but actually if you're facilitating, or even if you're just a person who's more comfortable speaking in the group, you might sometimes want to just, if you think of it, invite people to come in. And don't laser too hard on one person. That can be agonizing, but invite the whole group in. And invite dissent. Sometimes you get that spidey sense that somebody's kind of got their arms crossed and they're not into it. Invite that person in. Invite that dissent to come out. It's actually quite helpful.
And that's just, I think these kind of group working ideas are really important, and they're going to be this is a group of people who are um, don't know each other very well.
Yeah.
They don't know necessarily the skills they've got. It's kind of a pull together new group of people who are working on problems. Have you experienced that, and how have you overcome that in the past?
Well, that is a situation that I'll be honest, I haven't personally experienced as much. I have a few times, but I haven't experienced it as much. Um, One time when I did that, though, not too long ago, was with the New York Times. I went into the New York Times and helped them do like a 2 day. It's basically like a hackathon, and they form different teams to try to solve different problems, different new sort of ideas that they have. And one thing that struck me was actually how well, and I don't want to brag about the sprint process, but it worked really well in that context in terms of allowing people to sort of gel into a team and not have to worry so much about how to move forward. I think that's one of the things that I always personally found so frustrating was how much time I spent on my own projects working with teams, how much time we spent thinking like, what should we do next? And wondering, second guessing, is this the right next step to take? So part of what was good about it is it hopefully takes that stress away. So you don't have to worry about what to do next. And it gives some sense of like some roles that we're going to have at least for this week in terms of decision making and facilitation. And I hope that it'll help, even though you're thrown in together. In my limited experience, it works pretty good, but you are going to have a couple of challenges that you might as well be aware of, and you might want to keep in mind it'll be different than if you do a design sprint in the future with a team who you've been working with for a long time. So one of them is that the design sprint hinges on having a decider involved. I found over the years of developing this that was a really important thing for an effective problem solving activity. You've got to have the decision maker involved. In a team that's just been thrown together, there's not normally going to be a natural decision maker. And actually, well, how do you handle that? Do you have a
We force them to have a decider. So
Yeah,
one of their
great.
jobs, each
That's
day
great.
they rotate the facilitator, but the first job they have to do is decide a decider, and
Okay.
that sticks. So
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I, I have also in another setting where sort of teaching this as a class forced people to choose a decider. And I actually found in doing this class twice that it was better to, I thought it was better to do it randomly than to give any kind of process around it for students. But yeah, it's so important to have that decider. But the decider in your setting, and if, speaking again to you, all the students, in your setting, it's going to feel weird. Like, why is this person the decider? Like, however it happens, it's not going to be perfect, and that is odd in this situation, but in a situation where you're an intact team, it's super, super helpful. So just, you can kind of keep in mind like the cognitive dissonance of like, it's sort of weird now. Hopefully it does help things move faster. It's actually quite healthy and helpful in a regular team. And in fact, I think in those situations where someone is the leader for the long term, it helps that person be able to hopefully teaches them to make better and better decisions and get better instincts about making decisions for the customers because of the quick learning loop. Anyway, that's one thing that's kind of going to be a bit weird about it.
what about the stress? You mentioned stress there, Jake, and they've got, so our students have 1 week and it counts. It counts quite a lot for their project. So for each of them individually get a mark out of this, how would that affect the dynamics, do you think, just briefly?
Well, I don't know how you grade, so I'm gonna just kind of tell you that the the way I would imagine this working is that if people are participating fully, if they're being active in the sprint, then I hope they'll be eligible, they'll have the potential to get full marks.
Yeah, yeah.
Because part of the challenge with the sprint, and this is the stress that I think exists for me in every sprint when I'm participating, is that I don't know where the good solution is going to come from. Where's the winning solution going to come from? Who's going to have the idea that we choose, or the ideas plural that we choose to prototype? And it's hard to predict. And I had this experience of being many times, over 100 times, coming in as the consultant, the advisor from the venture capital fund. I'm the partner here, and now I want to help you out, this company. And I have this experience, working on Gmail, whatever. I should be an expert on product design. I should be the one who comes up with the smart idea. And I have to tell you, I pretty much never came up with the idea, even though every time I would draw it out, I would think this is the best idea. And then I'd put it up there, and time and again, it would be folks who had deep knowledge on the product itself. A lot of times they weren't the people who traditionally came up with these sorts of solutions. It might be someone from customer support or sales who wasn't normally involved in the product process, but somebody was able to translate their insight into a solution that we could use. And I found that it became impossible to predict, looking around the room, where is this going to come from? There's definitely a strong chance it's not going to come from me, even though I should be an expert on product design and the consultant. It's not necessarily going to come from the product manager or the CEO of the startup or whoever is in there. We just don't know. And so what you have to do, what I found I had to do, is I'm just going to go all in. I'm going to be wholehearted with my effort and try my best, but at the same time have kind of a light touch with it, where I don't get to, and this is where in the normal course of work, and I think whether it's work when you're studying or work in a workplace environment, it's hard to not get really I want it to be perfect, and I want it to be the thing that wins. Mm-hmm. So wanting it to be perfect, or wanting it to be as good as you can make it, not short of perfect, with the knuckles not quite clenched, short of perfect, that's good. You make it as good as you can, but then you have to be ready to let go. And the process will help you do that, but that is a stress that you can try to take away from yourself. There's no sense in a design sprint of trying to be perfect as an individual or as a team. The whole purpose is to learn, and we're doing it really well if we move through the steps, doing our best we can at each step, but then moving on when the time is right, because there is no perfection. We're always going to learn from what happens at the end. And I've seen so many teams come in and say, actually what happened was we learned that the way we were thinking about everything was quite a bit off. And there would have been no point spending an extra week, an extra month, extra year trying to come up with the perfect way to go this way when we need to go this way. So just try to keep that looseness in mind and not let yourself get too stressed.
I think that's absolutely right. I did some consulting, and after it was a very large company, and they said afterwards the most useful thing I gave them was one of the useful things I gave them other stuff, was the stopping arguing between the team and just saying, look, thank you. Yeah. If you say something doesn't make sense to you, it's not my job to argue with you so that you make sense of it. It's my job to change the design so that it makes sense.
Yeah.
So is that, how do you stop that? Because within the stress, how do you diffuse those arguments in a way?
Yeah. So this is a technique that I really like, is to try to capture what's going on. Try to get when an argument starts, or a discussion, even a healthy conversation can be damaging to the design sprint, because you have to keep moving. Yeah. So if a conversation is taking too long, getting too heated, whatever, and it's no longer sort of productive and helpful for us, what I want to do as a facilitator, but anybody can do this in the room, is to say, this is interesting stuff, but and I'd like to capture it. So I'm going to write it on the whiteboard. Maybe I can make it part of my map. Maybe I can write it as a how might we note. And all these things, if people are listening to this before starting, all these things will make sense to you as you go. Well, there are a lot of things that go up on the wall in the sprint that are places where you can stick stuff that comes up. You can stick conversations there, often in a very meaningful way. Like maybe we can capture this and then use it later in some way because we've put it out in a way that's useful. But sometimes we just have to capture it, and maybe knowing that we won't come back to it. But here's a parking lot of things that we might discuss after the sprint. The important part is to not let those things spiral too far. And so I always say, number one, this is interesting. Number two, let's capture it. Number three, we're going to have to keep moving because of the schedule. And I find that's important. There's actually this really interesting study, and I won't try to quote all of it now, but it's about people making Xerox copies, so it's from a long time ago, but using the word because to cut in line. And I think this is really powerful. If you use the word because, it helps people a lot to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And so I always like to say, like, it's an interesting conversation, capture it, but we need to move on. And I say because of the schedule. We're not ever going to get our prototype done. We're not going to get to the point we need to be. And I like to remind people the whole purpose of this week is for us to be able to test a prototype at the end. It's not to have the perfect anything. It's to test a prototype. And that's the point. And this is an even stronger argument to make, an even stronger way to defuse these conversations. If at the beginning you remind the team, hey, this is the beginning of our sprint week, and what we're here to do today and this week is to learn. We're not going to try to get things perfect. And I'll often say, like, I may remind you that of times, and as facilitator, I may interrupt you and force us to move on. And I like to ask people, and this is just sort of a consultant trick, I guess, but it's kind of a nice one. I like to ask people at the beginning, does that sound all right that I facilitate? And I'm going to kind of pause for a moment, wait for people to nod. And when they do, they're sort of giving me, well, symbolically, the power to do that. And I've noticed that later when I ask to move them on, it feels a bit nicer when they're like, oh yeah, like, that's right. They kind of smile, it's like, that's right. You said you were going to do that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move a little bit into the practical stuff, because it would be fantastic if you could just talk through just a few of the key techniques. So we've messed it around a bit. We're not doing a pure sprint in the same way, because we're introducing some other stuff in it, but we are using basic maps. So could you just describe very briefly what you think the maps are for and what they're useful for?
So the evolution of this idea of the map was that my background is working as a product designer, and then working to kind of coach different teams at Google, and then working at Google Ventures with startups. So that's where a lot of the design sprint stuff comes from, those experiences. And I found that the more complex the projects were, and especially when I came in as an outsider, the first thing I needed to do was to understand, what are you all doing? What's the project here? And to do that, I have a hard time with strictly hearing things. I'm not an auditory learner. So people would describe what was going on, and I'd be like, and then pretty quickly I couldn't track. And so I'd grab the whiteboard marker, and start, okay. And I finally realized, well, if I draw it as people say it, then I can keep track. And what I noticed would happen was that when I do that, if there was more than one other person in the room, it was like magic. Like, one person would be like, oh yeah, but once they could see it, once it was all laid out, then we could have this much richer conversation about where the challenges were, and two people working on the same project for the same amount of time would have a different view of how that map worked. So I tried to formalize it a bit, and introduce it as the first thing that we would do in a design sprint, so that I got up to speed and the whole team actually normalized the way they saw the system they were dealing with. What's somewhat unique about the way that you'll do the map in a design sprint, a lot of times these kinds of maps are very detailed. They're meant to be a plan for what we're going to do, a flow chart that shows how exactly the system is going to work. A lot of the times I'm thinking about software, so it's often like a user journey or a schematic that is click by click by click and showing you every single thing that can happen. Instead, the map you'll make in a sprint, it's like in Google Maps or something. If you're just sort of zooming out a few zooms, it's going to be higher level, so that it's not specific about the solution. I don't want to get too specific about, this is the way the thing sort of has to look and function. I don't want to get down to talking about buttons and details like that. I want to be way zoomed out and just talk about, for our different customer types, how do they move through? What are the things they need to accomplish in order for the system to work? And this sounds very vague. I know if you're listening to this, you might be like, what the heck is he talking about? But hopefully through examples that you might give them, or people just actually doing it, they'll get the sense.
Yeah. And our students are going to be also using some other techniques to do that zooming out, so we can talk about that. I just, while we sort of talk about this bit, I wondered if you could just explain to them what a how might we is, and in particular where it came about and why it's really useful as opposed to just a pile of normal post-it notes.
Sure. Yeah. So how might we know it is a very, it's been around for a while, this idea. It, I've for a long time have said it comes from Procter and Gamble in like the 50s, but I think it actually maybe goes back even a bit further than that. But it doesn't matter. The point is, I didn't come up with it, and it's it's been around for a really really long time. IDEO definitely took
Mhm.
this idea and sort of repopularized it or spread it, and that's how I heard about it. Uh, but the notion of a how might we note is, you imagine a sticky note, you write HMW in the corner, and then you write whatever on the rest of it. And we'll use these in a design sprint, and you can use them actually in any meeting if you like, as a way to take notes as a group. And so what happens is we're talking, and so I might be talking about the stress. Perhaps we're talking about what about the stress of the deadline, how students are going to be feeling pretty like under the gun, and maybe some pressure about the grades. And so that sounds really like kind of, oh man, that's a bummer, like feeling a bit down hearing about that. If I was going to write a how might we note to just kind of remind myself of that issue, I might write like, oh, how might we lower stress? So I've taken this thing that's a problem that we've heard about, and now I'm reframing it as a question. How might we lower stress? So that's sort of the idea of what a how might we note is. And of course, instead of talking about the student's experience, assuming that you're not designing a class, you'll be talking about the product. How might we build trust with our customers? As an example. What's cool, there's three things that are cool about these, and I like it to use how might we notes, even though they kind of annoy me because they're very artificial feeling. It's not the way people really talk. People don't say, how might we? It's just not the way normal conversations happen. So I feel like kind of a cheesy consultant whenever I'm like, now we're doing how might we notes. We're putting sticky notes up on the wall and we're organizing them. It just seems like baloney. The thing is that I've tried to take them out of the sprint process many times, and I found that it really, like, there's something missing when you don't do this step. Here's what's good about how might we's. Number one, they help get everybody in a problem-solving frame of mind. So in that example I just used, we go from seeing a problem and being like, ugh, that sucks. Now we have a way to capture it. And when you say, how might we build trust, or how might we reduce stress, it suddenly, now there's like, oh, there's potential paths. It gives me a different way of thinking, which is helpful. The second thing is that it's going to put everybody's notes in the same format. So I can put up a team, 5 people, 7 people, whoever many people are on the team. I can put their notes up on the wall later, and I'm going to be able to sort through those because they're all in the same format. I can do it very quickly. There's no other way that I know of to take notes where we can do that. If you take notes on a computer, whatever software you use, there's not going to be a form where they just condense down into that very simple thing. And so that's very handy, actually, as it turns out. And the other part about it is that I believe that taking notes on paper, and there's some science to back this up, taking notes on paper improves retention, improves your understanding of what's going on. It also, as you go through parts of the sprint where you're asking different people on the team to share information, sometimes people who may not be so comfortable sharing information with the team, and this is always the case in any team dynamic, when everybody's writing notes on paper, it's just a super respectful, welcoming way to hear them. And I find that it draws out more information from some of the people who sometimes are the ones I really need to hear from. The folks who may be a bit more introverted, who may be coming from a part of the organization outside of the product organization, and maybe they're less confident telling the product group how to build things. But they may have a gold mine of information. I really want to hear it. And if we're, instead of sitting on our laptops or typing on our phones or whatever, if people are writing on paper, it really gives people that feeling of like, yeah, I'm saying something interesting. This is worthwhile. And that's a very subtle thing. You don't even have to believe me to go for how might we notes, but I think that matters too.
So we're just talking about some of the practical stuff, and I just think Tuesday for us is really important. This remix and improve. And we use a lot of techniques in that day. We're using the crazy eights. We're starting to actually build some things. And for us, we're also starting to do some more technical design stuff within that. So I just wondered if you could talk through what a Tuesday is like in a 5 day sprint, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. So with Tuesday, we start off, we've got the map, we've chosen a target, which is something we haven't discussed, but it's really important. And maybe the big payoff for
Mm.
creating a map is that you decide who's our target customer for this week, what's the target moment, and now we're going to simulate that moment at the end of the week in our prototype. We're going to show those customers our simulation. So that's kind of the high level plot of the sprint. So on Tuesday, we find ourselves in this situation where we know what we have to do. We need solutions now. We need some candidates for what to build to show people for that specific moment. But even though we have that moment targeted, we have to also get the team ready to create solutions. And I know from my experience designing products that something that's very important to do is to not just work with the material that's already in my head, but to look outside and come up with some examples that might inspire me or suggest new ideas to me. So the sort of arc of what's going to happen on Tuesday is we'll start off by looking outside of the company, outside of maybe even our industry at inspiring things. And this is called lightning demos.
Mm.
And we're going to come up with some different patterns. We're going to see what are other people doing, especially in a situation where they have a challenge that's really tough, but it's analogous to the one we're dealing with. A lot of times, if I use the example of building trust, I would say, let's look at the companies who have done the best job of building trust when it was really hard to build trust. And that's almost always going to be in a different industry. So across all industries, Airbnb is an example of building trust when it's very hard. That was a weird idea that you would stay in other people's homes. And they did it by really just like figuring out how photography, taking great photos of the spaces. They invested a ton in that. They would send out professional photographers. They invested a lot in the UI, some of the specific tools, so it felt like a very robust, high quality tool. A lot of things like this that they did that are interesting and perhaps inspiring, even if you're in another industry. You can look at the ways that Lyft took advantage of Uber's missteps to boost up their trust in a way that actually dramatically improved the value of the company when they went public this year. So there are some interesting examples in any case, any kind of problem you're looking at. If you can generalize the problem and then look outside your industry, this is very interesting. And what we're looking for are some kind of patterns that we can then maybe, like you said, remix, or maybe we can improve on them in some way for our own solution. This is an important little thing because a lot of times people are either in this mode where they only look at their competitors, and then you're kind of either just copying your competitors or trying to think totally in the frame of what are the competitors doing and can we do something just like maybe tiny bit better, which is quite limiting. Or sometimes when people think about looking at what other people do, they are afraid of doing that. They don't do it at all because they say, well, we want to come up with something new. We want to be innovative. So we're going to come up with something completely from scratch. In reality, that's not the way the world works. No idea comes completely from scratch. They're always inspired by other things, remixes or improvements of other things. So what I think the most interesting thing to do is to just broaden your scope. So that's the morning. And then in the afternoon, we're going to sketch. And the sketching process is really, it's 4 steps. And what's going to happen is it's going to be enough steps that they're simple enough. Each one's very straightforward. By the end of the day, you're going to have a detailed solution with, it's going to show how you would approach the problem. But you're not going to feel like you had to do that all at once. So the steps, even including the morning step of doing these demos and looking outside, is going to help you just warm up and get to the point where that sketch is high quality, has a lot of thought behind it. And so Tuesday in the afternoon, it's about individual work and it's about everybody having enough time to come up with a solution. So it's not this kind of stressful brainstorm where it's like, okay, okay, Jake, go. Now you have to come up with something. It's not like that at all. You're really going to have a lot of time to think. And what I've seen happen over and over and over again is that really high quality solutions come out of this process.
Mm. Crazy eights are used as part of that. I just wondered if you could just walk through how to do crazy eights. I mean, we know the folding the piece of paper and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
individual work, but I think people struggle with this kind of quiet
yeah.
brainstorming technique.
Well, sure. So Crazy Eights is a step where you're asked to create 8 solutions in 8 minutes. So you have 1 minute per frame on a folded up sheet of paper. So they're small little things. And the idea is you'll sketch something, and then time will be up. You'll have to move along to the next one. You'll have to move along and move along. And so, yeah, you know what? If you struggle with this, good. Like, you're human. Everybody struggles with this. I struggle with doing this activity. I hate doing it myself. I love making other people do it. But when I'm the one who has to sit there with the pen and paper, I'm not happy. Um, but I think it's a very valuable activity because it gives you a chance to explore more than one path and get a bit loose. One of the biggest obstacles to problem solving is being precious, trying to make your solution perfect. Because if you sit there with, whether it's a blank piece of paper or a blank Word document or a PowerPoint, whatever it is, and you think, now I have to make this thing, that's stressful. Now I have to make this thing, because you want it to be really high quality. So I know that's an obstacle because it's a huge challenge for me. In a design sprint, I want to help this be easier for everyone on the team. And Crazy Eights is a way to do that, because you're forced to try different approaches, because you're forced to look at 8 different ways of solving something. You get past that preciousness, you get past that stress of the blank canvas. And by the time you get through to the other side and you've tried 8 different approaches, even if they all sucked, you're going to be more loose and more ready to tackle that solution that comes next. But I do often find that this approach of trying variations does yield something interesting. So if you're doing this exercise, you should know that maybe 25% of the time, people will come up with something that is valuable in it. So they're going to come up with something that they actually use. And that may not sound like a really great odds, like there's only a 1 in 4 chance that something you draw will be useful to you. But it's only 8 minutes. So for that small investment of time, I think that's very worthwhile, on the off chance that something comes out of it. And again, even if nothing comes out of it, I believe you'll be maybe more confident in your original solution because you tried 8 different approaches and you decided none of them were as good. That's valuable. Or at least, at the very least, you'll be looser and more ready to tackle that blank canvas for the last thing.
And okay, I think we've got a few more minutes left, and I just
Yeah.
wanted to step back a little bit and say, why is this a useful skill? Why do you think it's useful for students today, 2019, who are many of whom will go into high-powered consulting jobs in IT or into leadership positions in the IT industry? Why should they learn Sprint?
Yeah, good question. Especially when you look at the steps you're doing in a design sprint, you see that there are all these things on paper, on a whiteboard. It's very low tech. But I am very confident that these techniques are super powerful because I've seen inside companies who are so successful with their businesses. They're doing so many things so well. They're so sophisticated in many ways, but they struggle, just as everyone does, with these moments, these big moments when we have to work together. It's hard actually to work together as humans. When we have to problem solve, it's hard to come up with solutions when you're sort of in this mode of starting from scratch or in the beginning stage. So if you trust me, you can go confidently forward knowing that everybody has a hard time with this. They have a hard time with this inside Google. They have a hard time with this inside Slack. You name the company, they have a hard time with this inside NASA, inside Lego. Every company has a hard time with this step. What I think is valuable about this, though, is maybe goes even beyond this idea of the beginning moment of problem solving, when it really is valuable there. But just to the idea of sprints are about very basic stuff, very basic problem solving, very basic group dynamics, but also some of this work that we do on paper, whether it's taking notes as a map, whether it's taking notes, to put the solution on paper. They're very fundamental things that I find myself doing again and again, even outside of product design. If I'm, writing a blog post, writing a presentation, the kinds of things that actually come up in a generalized way for all of us throughout our careers and are very important moments. These are a generalized basic toolkit that you can use to approach those moments. And I think that I hope that you'll find them valuable. They've certainly been very valuable to me. The thing is, we're always all looking for like the high tech, the fancy, shiny tool that will help us do that stuff better. If only the software would do it for me, or if only what's the new iPad going to look like? Is that going to make me more productive at work? Is that going to make me smarter? And so often, actually, we just need a simple approach, And so I'm a big believer in doing things on paper. When you work together in a team, adding some structure to it so you get the most out of everyone's contribution. And I hope that this week you'll get to sort of practice those. And I hope you'll find a few things you can take forward to use in your personal work in addition to teamwork.